Samuel Brooks, thin and weathered, entered Old Pines' cafe with a quiet nod and a limp. No one said hello. Sarah, the young waitress with her half-tucked apron and a notepad too clean for the early hour, glanced up just in time to see him cross the threshold. She had seen him last Sunday too. Same entrance, same table, same silence. The door closed gently behind him, letting in a brief draft of wet leaves and pine. It was Veterans Day morning in Kingsburg, Oregon, and the cafe buzzed with its annual tradition, veterans receiving half-priced breakfast while locals made room for men wearing caps embroidered with ships, squadrons, and service emblems. But Samuel wore no hat, just a brown corduroy jacket buttoned high, charcoal gray slacks long stripped of their crease, and weathered black shoes dulled by years of use. His cane supported his careful steps as he made his way to table 9, his usual spot by the window, near enough to the coffee station to be noticed, but distant enough to remain in his quiet bubble. A few patrons lowered their voices as he passed, some casting sideways glances. One man muttered, "Looks like he just walked in from the junkyard." The others chuckled softly. Sarah hesitated behind the counter. She had only worked there for a month, but understood today's unspoken rules. Be polite, be quick, and avoid trouble. Yet something about Samuel unsettled the rhythm of the morning. She approached him with a gentle smile. "Morning, sir. Veteran special today is eggs, toast, and black coffee." Samuel simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." No mention of discount. Just quiet gratitude. A few minutes later, Sarah returned with the tray. Samuel had already unfolded a napkin from his pocket, laying it precisely beside his utensils. He paid in exact cash, adding a $1 tip. Sarah lingered slightly, noticing how steady his hands were. As Samuel sipped his coffee, a well-dressed woman nearby whispered to the assistant manager, "Some of us are trying to enjoy breakfast with our grandchildren. Perhaps he'd be more comfortable outside?" The message was passed to Sarah, who, with a heavy heart, approached again. "Sir, I'm sorry, but a few guests asked if you might prefer the patio. It's quieter out there." Samuel looked up for the first time, not angry, just tired. "No trouble, miss." He rose slowly, balancing the tray in one hand and his cane in the other. Every eye in the cafe followed his journey to the patio, where cold metal tables awaited beneath an American flag gently flapping in the November breeze. Samuel chose a corner table with a view of the alley and rooftops. Carefully, he placed a yellowed photograph beneath his glass of water, protecting it from the wind. Two young men in uniform smiled back from decades ago. Inside, a boy tugged on his father's jacket. "Why does that man walk funny?" His father leaned down and whispered, "Don't stare. He's just some old guy." From behind the counter, Sarah watched Samuel through the window, her throat tight as she noticed his untouched plate. For a brief moment, the clouds parted and sunlight illuminated his wrist. Beneath the frayed jacket cuff was a faded tattoo, a crest pierced by a dagger. The doorbell chimed as Daniel Carter entered the cafe. The former Navy SEAL was home for the holiday. The familiar scent of strong coffee, hash browns, and cinnamon rolls washed over him. Ordering coffee and bacon, Daniel turned toward the window and froze when he spotted the tattoo on Samuel's wrist. His heart stuttered. He had memorized that tattoo during SEAL training. Daniel approached Sarah. "Is it okay if I step out there?" Already moving, he didn't wait for her answer. The cold air hit as Daniel crossed the patio. He stood 2 feet from Samuel and respectfully asked, "Excuse me, sir, is that a wave crest and dagger?" Samuel's pewter-colored eyes met Daniel's. "It is." "Are you Brooks, Unit S-17? Samuel nodded slowly. "A long time ago, yes." Without hesitation, Daniel snapped into a salute, his posture precise and full of reverence. Inside the cafe, the entire room fell silent. Every patron turned to witness the moment unfolding on the patio. Sarah stepped outside with a fresh cup of coffee. "On the house," she whispered, setting it beside him. Daniel turned toward the silent crowd inside and spoke. "This man before you is the reason. 17 of our brothers came home alive. He mapped the swift current evac through hostile terrain. He kept them alive with nothing but memory, grit, and a hand-drawn map." One by one, the cafe's regulars stood and began to applaud, not loud, but steady and full of respect. Samuel sat, quietly, his hands folded as recognition he had never sought finally found him. The wind gently rustled through the metal chairs on the patio of Old Pines' cafe. The November sun dipped lower behind the sloped roofs of Kingsburg as Samuel Brooks sat at the iron table, sipping his second cup of black coffee. The faded photograph beneath his water glass still held firm, weighted against the occasional breeze. The door creaked again as Sarah stepped outside, carrying a small tray. This time, it wasn't just coffee. On the tray was a folded, yellowed envelope. She approached slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Samuel looked up at her. There was no irritation in his eyes, only patience, as though he'd long grown used to people approaching him for reasons they couldn't entirely explain. I think this belongs to you, sir," Sarah said softly, offering him the envelope. "It was my grandmother's. She said I would know when it was time." Samuel furrowed his brow. With steady, careful fingers, he accepted the envelope and unfolded it. The paper inside crackled, as though it hadn't been touched in years. His eyes moved over the handwriting with a deliberate slowness, reading every word as if unlocking a door to a past life. "Your friend always, William Hart." At the sight of the name, Samuel exhaled, a deep breath that carried decades of weight. His lips barely moved as he whispered, "William." The name pulled him back in time, back to the jungles of Laos, to the humid nights filled with the chorus of insects and the heavy scent of danger. William Hart had been more than just his teammate. He had been family. Sarah's voice trembled as she explained, "William was my grandfather. My grandmother told me stories, but she never spoke of how he died, only that he never made it back." Samuel's eyes softened as he looked at her. "He was the bravest man I ever knew," he said, his voice low but steady. "And he never asked me for anything, except one thing." Sarah leaned forward, drawn by the gravity of his words. "What was it?" Samuel swallowed hard, his eyes now fixed not on Sarah, but on a distant memory only he could see. "He told me, 'Make it home, then buy me pie.'" His voice cracked slightly, the weight of unfulfilled promises lingering between them. The patio grew quieter still, as though even the wind was now listening. A few moments later, the door to the cafe opened once more. Daniel Carter stepped out again, this time carrying a small leather-bound notebook under his arm. His expression was different now, not just one of awe, but of responsibility. "Mr. Brooks," Daniel said respectfully as he approached the table, "I went through the SEAL archives last night. I found 2 debriefs. You were in both of them. S-17, the Laos mission. You were only ever referred to as Brooks, map specialist." Samuel smiled faintly, the kind of smile worn by those who have carried burdens too long to share. "I was never good with titles, but I could draw a map." Daniel gently placed his notebook on the table. "Sir, we don't have many like you left, and most of what you did and people don't even know." Samuel reached into his jacket once more and retrieved another envelope. This one older, the corners frayed and the paper nearly brittle. He slid it across the table toward Daniel and Sarah. Daniel unfolded it carefully. Inside was a hand-drawn map, meticulously detailed with terrain notations, elevation shifts, and thick lines tracing through enemy territory. One small mark was labeled Swift Current Exfil. Samuel's finger gently touched that point. "That was Laos," he said. "We were down 4 men, radio scrambled, compass cracked, no satellites. We had to navigate by stars and by slope. William, Was point man, even after being hit. We moved slow but steady. Took us 12 hours to cover 7 miles. Sarah's breath caught. She was hanging on every word now. She glanced at the map and could almost feel the oppressive jungle heat. The risk, the fear, the hope. Daniel scribbled notes as quickly as he could in his notebook. "Sir, what you did, it wasn't just brave, it was impossible." Samuel shook his head gently. "Not impossible, just quiet." He paused for a long moment before continuing. His voice remained calm, though something inside him was clearly stirring. "Back then we didn't talk about extraction routes in public. Hell, we didn't even tell replacements. If you went down, it was muscle memory, gut instinct, and trust." Samuel's fingers traced along one of the ridgelines on the map, as though it was still fresh in his mind. His eyes momentarily glistened, not with tears, but with the sheen of distant memory. "I still see the cliffs when I close my eyes," he whispered. "And I still hear William say it right before the radio went dead. 'Make it home, then buy me pie.' I never did. That's why I came back here." Sarah lowered her head, gripping her hands together to keep them from trembling. Daniel spoke softly. "Sir, you did come home. And because you did, you made sure the ones who followed knew how to survive. Every SEAL that came after owes you." Samuel reached back into his envelope and pulled out a faded photograph. He carefully laid it on the table between them. In the picture stood 8 young men, sleeves rolled, sunburned arms, mess kits in, and some leaning on each other like brothers, too proud to admit how much they needed one another. He stared at the image for a long moment, his voice quieter now. "Only I came back walking barely. There was no silence this time. Only understanding." Sarah wiped at the corner of her eye, but smiled through it. "My grandmother's coming to the school assembly next week," she said softly. "William would want her to be here." Samuel nodded slowly. "I don't like speeches," he admitted. Daniel's voice was calm but firm, carrying no pressure, only truth. "The world needs to hear the names of the quiet ones, sir. You're ready." A week later, Samuel sat alone beneath the great oak behind Old Pine's cafe, the tree older than even the town itself. Its gnarled roots gripped the earth like ancient fingers. Afternoon sun warmed the golden leaves above, casting soft shadows across the iron table. Sarah arrived quietly, carrying a small woven tray with a thermos of warm cider, 2 paper cups, and thick slices of pumpkin loaf wrapped in napkins. Without a word, she set it down and took her seat. She didn't want to disturb whatever silence Samuel had chosen today. "You didn't have to bring all this," Samuel finally said, his voice calm but not cold. "It's not from me," Sarah replied with a small smile. "It's from Martha, in the kitchen. She said you used to fix her dad's truck for free." Samuel gave a soft grunt, neither confirming nor denying the memory, and poured cider into 2 cups. The warmth seeped into their hands as they sat in peaceful quiet, sharing not just drinks but understanding. Daniel joined them shortly after, wearing casual khakis and a windbreaker embroidered with the SEAL trident. With him were 6 young recruits, clean-shaven, straight-backed, eyes sharp, watching the man whose name they had only heard whispered in training. "Mr. Brooks," Daniel said softly. "These men asked if they could meet you." The recruits stepped forward one by one, each pausing to nod respectfully. None spoke, none needed to. Samuel's eyes passed over them like a father seeing the next generation of sons. He nodded back, eyes steady. Daniel set his notebook on the table. "Sir, after next week's assembly, your story will finally be recorded where it belongs." Samuel exhaled slowly and simply said, "It's not about me." "It never was," Daniel agreed. "That's exactly why it matters." They sat there, beneath the oak, as the golden afternoon settled around them, 3 generations bound not by blood, but by service, by sacrifice, and by silent promises kept across decades. And for the first time in many years, Samuel Brooks did not feel like A man sitting alone. The crisp November morning unfolded like a ceremony itself. Clouds hung heavy, yet broke just enough to let shafts of gold spill through onto the small town of Kingsburg. Scarves wrapped tightly, boots pressing into the still wet pavement, and the faint scent of wood smoke drifted on the breeze. The gymnasium of Kingsburg Elementary was filled to capacity. Folding chairs stretched in even rows, each seat filled with students, teachers, parents, and veterans. The murmurs were polite, subdued. Everyone seemed to sense that today wasn't simply another school assembly. A large banner hung over the stage, remembering the quiet ones. At the front sat two displays. On one easel, a photograph of 8 young men in uniform, sunburnt and grinning under a blinding jungle sun. Their sleeves rolled, their faces young, full of unspoken fear but unmistakable camaraderie. On the other easel, a carefully preserved hand-drawn map. The once fragile document now safely framed, its faded ink still sharp enough to trace riverbeds, slopes, and that small handwritten notation. Swift Current Exfil, Laos, 1971. Beside the stage stood Mr. Harrison, the retired schoolteacher, who had quietly coordinated much of today's event. His clipboard tucked under one arm, he scanned the crowd with quiet pride. He had taught many of the parents here, and years ago he had taught Sarah's mother as well. The buzz of conversation faded as Daniel Carter stepped forward. Dressed sharply in his Navy SEAL dress blues, Daniel stood confidently at the podium. He paused, allowing the respectful hush to deepen. "This town is lucky," Daniel began, his voice strong but sincere. "We're about to hear a story that was never meant to be heard. A story that didn't chase medals, didn't fill books, but changed lives. 17 men came home because of one." He turned slightly, his eyes shifting toward the man seated behind him. Samuel Brooks rose slowly. He wore no uniform, no ribbons pinned to his chest. Just his brown corduroy jacket, freshly pressed for the occasion, and sturdy black shoes, carefully shined for the first time in years. The gymnasium fell into a complete, reverent silence. Even the fidgety children stilled, their small paper flags resting in their laps. Samuel stood at the microphone, both hands resting gently on the wood, as though steadying not his body, but the weight of memory itself. "My name is Samuel Brooks," he began. "I served with SEAL Unit S-17. His voice was calm, but underneath it trembled something alive. Not fear, but the rawness of memory surfacing after years of being locked away. We were stationed deep in contested territory during the Vietnam conflict," Samuel continued. "Some of the men in that photo behind me never came home." He paused briefly, letting that truth settle into the hearts of every listener. "I'm not here to tell you war stories. I'm not here to speak of medals, because I never earned one worth mentioning. What I did earn were handshakes, trust, and one promise." His eyes glanced briefly toward Sarah, who sat near the front with her grandmother, William Hart's widow. "William Hart, your grandfather," Samuel said softly, directing his voice toward Sarah now, "was my closest friend. He asked one thing of me before his last breath: make it home, then buy me pie." A few children in the front row smiled at the unexpected simplicity of that request. Even Sarah's grandmother dabbed at the corner of her eye. Samuel let his gaze sweep the gym, not searching for anyone, simply acknowledging everyone. Most people think heroes shout, they storm beaches, they make speeches. But in our unit, there were others, men who carried radios, drew maps, stitched wounds, and dragged brothers one step at a time when they couldn't walk themselves. He paused again, not from hesitation, but from respect. They mattered. Samuel inhaled deeply, steadying his voice as it wavered. "We don't all wear medals, but some carry ink that never fades." The quiet words landed heavy across the gym. No one clapped. Not yet. Not because they didn't want to, but because clapping felt too small. Behind Samuel, Mr. Harrison nodded toward the side of the stage. From behind the curtain, Kingsburg's mayor stepped forward, a short, round man with a carefully folded on proclamation in his hands. The mayor adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, voice steady but weighted. "Mr. Brooks," he began, turning so his words filled the entire gym, "on behalf of Kingsburg, we dedicate the alley behind Old Pines' Café as Quiet Honor Lane." A staff member gently pulled back another curtain, revealing a tall bronze plaque mounted on an easel. Its polished surface gleamed under the overhead lights. The crest, pierced by a dagger, Samuel's tattoo, was etched into the top of the plaque. Below it the words, "Not every hero raises his voice." The applause came then, not explosive, but steady, rising chair by chair. Some stood. Some pressed hands over hearts. A few veterans quietly removed their caps. Even the children stood on their toes, watching the man who had once slipped unnoticed through town. Samuel bowed his head, simply receiving the gratitude. After the ceremony, most people gathered around the plaque for pictures. But Samuel remained seated on the folding chair by the podium, his hands resting gently on his knees. Sarah approached, carrying a small plate carefully wrapped with a linen napkin. She set it beside him and leaned close. "One slice of pecan pie," she whispered, "for William." Samuel smiled softly, closing his eyes for a moment as the memories washed gently over him. "Thank you, Sarah," he whispered. Months passed. Winter yielded to spring. Dogwoods bloomed early that year. Light rains swept through Kingsburg, coating the narrow alley behind Old Pines' Café in a delicate shimmer. At the far end of Quiet Honor Lane stood a polished bench beneath the old oak. The bronze plaque beside it remained freshly polished, often visited but never disturbed. Nearby, a corkboard displayed letters written by local schoolchildren. "Thank you for being brave even when no one saw you. I want to be quiet like you and still matter." Wildflowers gathered beneath the bench, as if placed there by nature itself. Sarah stood near the entrance to the cafe, no longer wearing her waitress apron. Today, she wore a navy cardigan, her hair pulled neatly into a bun, with a quiet confidence that had grown in her since that first Veterans Day. Behind her stood Daniel, no longer in full uniform but in khakis and a windbreaker embroidered with the seal trident. Beside him stood 6 new recruits, young men and women just beginning their own journeys, but fully aware whose shoulders they stood upon. The small crowd gathered quietly for a private remembrance. Sarah stepped forward first. "Thank you all for coming," she said softly. "Today isn't about speeches or uniforms. It's about honoring someone who walked with quiet purpose, who never asked for recognition, but whose impact we continue to feel." Daniel followed. "Some legends live in books," Daniel said. "Others serve coffee and fix trucks. They raise no banners, they demand no credit, but their sacrifices echo through those of us who followed." A ripple of quiet nods passed through the crowd. Near the bench sat a covered table. Sarah gently pulled the cloth away, revealing a gleaming prosthetic leg mounted on a velvet pad. The titanium shimmered under the soft morning light. On its side, an engraving, "For the one who walked so others could." Gasps weren't audible, but many straightened their backs instinctively, hands finding hearts. Daniel guided the young recruits forward. One by one they paused before the leg, placing a respectful hand over the engraved crest. Not a formal salute, but quiet recognition. Then they stepped back, their heads bowed briefly. At the end of the line, Sarah approached a small shrine. Beside the bench, framed was Samuel's photograph, in uniform now, the once faded napkin with William's handwriting preserved behind glass. Next to it rested the yellowed envelope, the letter that had brought them all together. Sarah carefully added one final piece. a small folded letter she had written herself, addressed simply, "To the quiet ones." She whispered, barely audible, "But fully present, we see you now." The wind stirred gently, rustling branches and lifting the corner of the napkin for a brief moment. Underneath, the words remained etched like a quiet anthem. "Silence, when true, speaks forever." The gathering stood still for a few moments longer, allowing the breeze and the memory of Samuel Brooks to settle like soft spring rain across Kingsburg. In that quiet town, the once forgotten man at table 9 was no longer unknown. His chair might be empty, but his legacy, like the map he once drew, continued to guide others long after his steps had faded.